the final NAP webinar of this academic year, and a really great topic of open science. We're going to be joined by 3 experts in the area of open science, Dermot, Lynott, Radu, Vasiu, and Niamh, Brennan. So we'd be delighted to take any questions or interactions. So please go ahead and use either the Q&A or the chat function as we go along. And there'll be plenty of opportunity to discuss after each presentation and also at the end. So go ahead and get involved. And now for a shameless plug. So hopefully we'll see some of you at the Eden conference in Dublin on the 18th to 20th of June. You can still register, although we're running out of places very fast. It's going to be a very well attended conference. So looking forward to seeing some of you there, I hope. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now for a moment. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Dr. Dermot Lynott from Maynooth University, Assistant Professor of Psychology with research interests centered around cognitive science and open science. Dermot has been working on open research practices and open educational resources for over 10 years. And with colleagues at Lancaster University, he founded the Promoting Open Sciences Practices Group. I'm going to skip down to the lower part of his bio because it's a very long bio. He also formed the Maynooth Open Research Network. And if I'm correct, he's principal investigator on the National Open Research Framework project in Ireland, which aims to develop a national training program for open research, otherwise known as NORF. So welcome, Dermot, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Orna, and thanks for the invitation. And hello to everyone from all over Europe and beyond. I'll just attempt to share my slides now, or share screen first. Share screen. Okay. You can see those okay?
Yeah. All good.
Great. Okay, I'll get started. So yeah, the title of the talk is The Importance of Open Research and Grassroots Movements. So I use the term open research just to be more inclusive than saying open science. It the issues tend to go well beyond sciences and social sciences and impact humanities and any discipline you care to think about. So really, I'm going to try and make 3 points really today. First, think about what the problems are facing science and researchers generally. And then I'm going to talk about one single practice, open research practice, that may help some of the issues we face, and that's study pre-registration. And then I'm going to talk a bit about how local grassroots groups and networks can help in our move towards culture change, research culture change. So the problem is that researchers are faced with a lot of problems and competing demands on their time and on the outputs that they're supposed to produce. So I've misquoted Samuel L. Jackson from the movie Pulp Fiction here, that the path of the righteous researcher is beset on all sides by perverse incentive structures and the tyranny of questionable research practices. What I mean by that is perverse incentive structures are those incentives that drive academics to succeed in their field. And they include things like, publishing in high impact journals, getting very sexy results with high significance. And if you don't get those, then you're going to have problems getting promotions, getting grants, and getting all the kudos that goes with those things. But one of the ways you can make sure that you achieve all of these things is using questionable research practices. And questionable research practices are those things that mightn't be outright fraud necessarily, but are things that occur that help you achieve, for example, statistical significance, or help you get the results that you want that fits in with your pet theory and so on. And the problem is that questionable research practices exist at basically every step of the research cycle. And so if you imagine a research cycle, you start by generating a hypothesis, you design a study, collect data, analyze, interpret, publish. However, if you look at each stage, there are problems that occur, such as lack of replications, low statistical power, selective reporting, and others. I'm just going to very briefly mention about these and how extreme the problems are, and then I'll say what the outcome is of these problems existing throughout our sciences and research studies. So we've got all these devils, and you might think, well, these are minor problems, but in fact, when you try to look systematically at what's going on, is really quite serious. So you might think that being able to replicate studies or findings is a really central element of what makes a good science. But it turns out when you look at the literature, only about 1 in 1,000 research papers contain replication studies. That's not great. I mean, maybe you don't want it 50-50, but you'd like a lot more than that. We also have extremely low statistical power in our studies. That means our sample sizes are too small, or the number of materials or items that we're using in our studies are not large enough to be able to detect the effects that we want to detect. So, for example, you might want the statistical power of your study to be at about, say, 90%, 95%. But in fact, when you look at it, the statistical power is about 50% or worse, generally, and multiple studies have found this. It seems to be improving very slightly over the last 10 years, but not sufficiently. A real problem is selective reporting, and this is effectively like cherry picking. And this is rife, happening in between 50 and 100% of research publications, depending on what domain you look at. And that's basically things like a researcher collecting maybe a dozen different measures of interest, but only reporting the ones that actually come out statistically significant. And worse, not saying that they've collected these other things, just hiding them or ignoring them. So we never know what they've actually done. Another popular questionable practice is known as hypothesizing after the results are known. So effectively, you have a situation where your theory predicts that Group A is going to do better than Group B in some task or something, and then you find actually that Group B does better. So rather than report that this is a contradictory finding, you rejig your theory so that this is what you predicted all along. And it becomes a just so story. And this is, again, very high prevalence that researchers do this. And then these are all compounded by a lack of sharing of data and materials, which is in the majority of studies. And because our studies are underpowered, and because there's a tendency for journals to only want to publish significant results, it means we get a misrepresentation in the literature. We get mostly positive results, and we never see the failed replications or the failed results or the null effects, even though they're really important for us to get a full picture of what's going on in any particular domain. So what's the outcome of this? Well, when people try to systematically replicate areas of research to see how robust findings are, it turns out we have serious problems. And in my own field of psychology, there was an attempt to replicate a bunch of classic studies in social psychology. The failure rate was about 70%. That's not great. Then following that, there was the Open Science Collaboration Reproducibility Project, which was published in Science in 2015, where they tried to replicate 100 studies from the top psychology journals, and the failure rate was about 60%. Now, if you were being uncharitable, you might say, well, this is psychology, you know, it's a soft science, or it's not a real science. The hard sciences are bound to do better, but actually that's not the case at all. If you look at cancer cell biology, a failure rate of about 90% to get really classic studies in this area. And indeed, that failure to replicate has been replicated itself. Things haven't improved dramatically in the last few years. Cardiovascular health, areas, you know, where people's lives are at stake, the failure rate was just as high or higher than some areas of psychology. So these are really serious problems. And I don't think people, and certainly the general public, don't realize that when they look at published research findings, that actually oftentimes the findings are not better than chance when they look at them. And these arise because of a general lack of transparency in data materials, publication bias, of course, because mostly positive results are published. Undisclosed flexibility. By that I mean researchers are free to analyze and present data any way they want, and we effectively have to take their word for it in the paper. So if they run 20 studies and only report 2, we have no way of knowing without having that transparency about their research process and about their whole research pipeline. And then this is also compounded by the fact that you often get incomplete methods, so you don't have sufficient details to be able to go away and replicate someone else's study. So all of these cause big problems and cause that poor level of replication across a bunch of different areas. So I'm going to talk about one open research practice that I think is a really good place to start for people to be thinking about how to improve the rigor of their research, and that's study pre-registration. And it's not complicated, and it shouldn't be controversial. And effectively, it's just a time-stamped document describing the details of a planned study. And all the pre-registration is doing is simply making transparent your plans. And the idea is that you're doing this in advance of collecting any data. You say what I'm going to do. And the things that go into your document are not controversial. You specify the design, your sample size, what the variables are, if you're manipulating variables, how you're going to analyze the data, and any other things you want to report. And these are basically features that would have to be included when you are submitting an ethics application or going to your institutional review board. All that information is there. But this is just collating it in a single document and making your plans transparent in advance. And I'm just going to give one example of how study pre-registration can really help us get a much clearer picture of what's going on in a domain of research. And this is not my particular research domain, but it's a nice example. This is looking at clinical trials of antidepressants. Of course, depression is extremely common in the population, and we want to know if drugs that are being prescribed are actually working. That is, are they beneficial in reducing symptoms, reducing harms related to depression, and so on. So back in the early 2000s, the Federal Drug Authority in the US mandated that clinical trials like this had to pre-register their trials on their public repository, which was great. And what Turner and colleagues did, they were able to look at journal published versions of these trials. And what they found, all you need to see is that each block here, white block or black block, is a trial. A white block is a positive outcome, so supporting the efficacy of the drug. And a black box is showing a non-positive or a negative effect of the drug. If you scan here, you see loads of positive outcomes, which is great. And then imagine you're being prescribed a drug and you look at the literature and you find, okay, here's one, paroxetine. It's got a bunch of positive results and only a couple of negative ones. That's the drug for me. And maybe you ask your GP or psychiatrist to prescribe this drug. What Turner and colleagues did was went back to the original registries, which includes all of the published studies, but also ones that never made it to journal publications. And of course, those are the ones that maybe don't have the significant results or don't have the positive outcomes that researchers were looking for. And what happens when you look at the registry is you get a completely different picture. Now you'll notice there's loads of black boxes, which are the negative outcomes from the clinical trials. And if you look specifically at the highlight one, which is our friend paroxetine, actually there are more negative trials than positive trials. So it's a completely different picture. And now, if you ask yourself, would you want to be prescribed that drug? Probably not, because the evidence is actually against it being effective in treating depression. And the only way the researchers were able to do this was because the trials had been pre-registered. They could go back and see what people had said they were going to do, even if it never made it to journal publication. So that's one real advantage of pre-registration, is that it makes transparent what's going on in an area. It doesn't necessarily improve the quality of research, but at least you can see what's going on. So how can grassroots movements and local groups help in moving people towards these kinds of practices and improving transparency in their research processes? Well, we were thinking about culture change really here. And that happens at numerous different levels, from policy down to infrastructure. And the one thing that's important to think about is doing research is a type of behavior. And what you want to do is change people's behavior for the better. And open research groups and local networks, what they're doing is making it normative to do these open research practices, so that it's easy then for people to come along and say, oh, well, I can do that too. And it's not seen as going against the grain or being an outlier, which it is at the moment in many places. It is. If you're pre-registering studies, the vast majority of your colleagues might not be doing that. And so you're seen as going against the grain. Whereas if you've got a local group coming together, discussing these issues, normalizing it, it becomes much easier to get people on board and to build up momentum. And very briefly, I'm just going to look at how quickly you can see this culture change taking effect. So in the group that we started in Lancaster a few years ago before I moved back to Ireland, called Promoting Open Science Practices, as Orna mentioned, we just wanted to consider how open science principles could be implemented effectively to improve research transparency in psychology. And we basically just started with a small group of PhD students and academic staff getting together to just chat about these issues. But quickly it grew in membership and scope. And people started getting involved in all sorts of activities, doing seminars, workshops, getting involved in international collaborations, looking at open research practices and replicating studies. I found it was really beneficial working with the library, who have so much knowledge and really care about, knowledge curation and open access and all of these things that are really important to us. And they've also got so much knowledge and resources and interest in these things that the library is often our best friend in these kind of activities. And if we look at how quickly setting up a group or a network like this can make an impact on people's behavior in terms of research, well, we try to calculate this through repeating a survey over a few years. Initially, we just estimated what people were doing by looking at their published work, and the rate of people doing study pre-registration or open sharing their materials or data was quite low, about 10% in 2015. And we set up the group in 2017. By 2018, a majority of people were pre-registering studies. Lots of people were opening their materials and their data sets on public repositories, and the vast majority of people wanted to learn more, be more engaged with open research. The following year, we now had a majority of staff and PhD students doing pre-registration, sharing data, sharing materials, and people were still interested in getting more engaged. So this was in the space of about 3 years, seeing a total flip in the level of transparency and openness that people were embedding in their research practices. And there are local groups and activities springing up all over the place. It's kind of just getting going in the last couple of years in Ireland. We've got a group in Maynooth and Galway, and recently set up Dublin Open Research Network. If you're not in Ireland, we've got groups in the UK, the UK Reproducibility Network, which has got offshoots in Switzerland, Norway, Italy. So if you look around, there's probably a group in your country that's doing something along these lines. There's also the International Network of Open Scholarship Communities, which started in the Netherlands, but has got groups around Europe as well. And the Centre for Open Science, which is based in the States, which is an amazing starting point for information, resources, and providing infrastructure for people to share data and materials and so on. So if you're interested in learning more, just do a web search and find who your local groups or local contacts are in this, and get together and start small. Start, organizing a webinar like this, or a small seminar, or a coffee morning to get people talking about these issues. And to quote the old aphorism that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. And it's very much the same for opening research practices. There are things we should have been doing a long time ago that we weren't, but there's no better time than to try and start now. And I will leave it there. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Dermot. Gosh. And I think, Carlos, are you posting slides in the chat there? Brilliant. Fantastic. So if you want to ask any questions to Dermot, you can put them either in the Q&A, although the Q&A has lots of weather in it, because I think the chat was disabled, or into the chat. I see one here. What do you think about the teaching of research at HEIs, Dermot? That's a good question.
So it is in the Q&A, is it? Okay. I mean, research, from what I've seen, the way we teach research methods tends to not integrate open research practices very well. Or in some cases, it's like seen as a side thing that you don't really need to consider about. But my belief is that we should be thinking about things like open research and research integrity right from, first year undergraduate studies. And in psychology, we actually did that. We totally reoriented our teaching of research methods and put modules on research integrity and open research methods and meta science in first year. And I think some colleagues were concerned that first year undergraduates wouldn't be able to this, or that we should teach them the traditional approach first and then talk about this later. But actually they were fine with it and really interested. And they were kind of a bit surprised that this wasn't the way things were anyway. Students are a bit shocked when they see how closed our systems actually are.
Indeed, on many levels.
Mm.
That was a good one. Any more questions for Dermot at this point? Let me just have a quick scan through the chat. It's lots of good weather to report, though, I can tell that.
Oh, I see. It was a Chinese proverb I was quoting there.
There was, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, nothing else so far. You can come. You have another chance to ask Dermot a question in about 40 minutes. So thanks very much, Dermot.
Thanks, everyone.
And I'm just going to introduce Radu. So Radu Vasiu is a professor in the Faculty of Electronics, Telecommunication and Information Technology at the Polytechnic University of Timisoara, the university of my Eden colleague, Vlad. And his research areas are in the fields of e-learning, multimedia, web technologies, open data, and smart cities. So you're very welcome, Radu, and over to you.
Thank you very much. I will start sharing my screen first, and then we can discuss a little more. I hope that you are able to see properly the presentation now.
Yeah.
And I will start by thanking Dermot for his presentation. I would say that at the beginning I was a little bit afraid because we hadn't had any discussion before about what we are presenting, each of us. So maybe it was supposed that we are saying quite similar things in a way or another. But Dermot spoke quite a lot about grassroots, and I think I will speak more about policies of open science. This is why I will start my presentation by something which I'm enjoying as a starting point for open science, which are the principles of open science which are recommended by UNESCO. I think that many of us are having in mind that the idea of open started first of all with open access, and with the idea of having the results of the research open for many people. And now it is quite different, because there are quite a lot of fields which can be expressed at the same time. So open access means that the public will have free access to the results of the research. Open access also means that we avoid double financing, because one of the discussions about research was many times about paying for publishing something, then paying for reading what we published. Then it is also the idea of increasing collaboration between partners. And we have, I think it was something wrong, and you couldn't see very well my screen. Now I think it's better. If you can just confirm, Orna.
Yes, perfect now, Radu. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, because I realized that something and I received a private message about that. So sorry for the problem. So going back, there are a lot of fields which should be addressed in open science, and there are just a few of them here. And we don't have the time to discuss each one of them in details, but you can see, and you will see from the policies that different actors are addressing different fields from these policies. And finally, we try to have an ecosystem which is addressing all the ideas about open science, open publishing, open innovation, and I would also say open education, because they are all linked in a way or another. Starting from open access, Creative Commons have been the first things having in mind in order to share different ideas and different results. And you just have here put in a sort of graphic with mind map a lot of things which can be taken into consideration when that, but I don't think we have to discuss them now into details, but maybe if there are some interest from the audience, we can take it through questions. There is a lot of literature in the field, starting with the general ones, UNESCO, which I already mentioned, that it is an OECD toolkit, which is about open science, which is helping in going to the digital transformation. And of course, at the European level, there are some documents which I would like to talk, because, as I said from the title, my presentation has in mind some more information about European universities, and especially about European university alliances, which are having to take into consideration this field. So these two publications can be shared from the link which I also already gave you. And I will go a little bit quicker, because time is pressing, about a study which has been made at the European level by the European University Association. This has been a study which started in 2020. The results have been published in 2021. It was quite at the same time when the fashion of European University Alliances was coming up. Nobody knew exactly what is going to be, but everybody was struggling to see how the future should be. And this was how the vision of the university for 2030 came up. And one of the main idea was open science, which helps collaboration. What is interesting from the results of the survey, which I'm not going to discuss into detail, but I just put it highlighted to the first and the last one. It is very interesting that more than half of the universities have said that open science policies are of a strategic importance. They are very important, ranking high, and so on. Many of the universities said they already have some policies, some others that they are developing one. But at the same time, in I would say quite a lot of university, because 1/3 is quite a lot, as you see in the last sheet. Not any measure, not any element of open science have been taken into consideration when speaking about academic assessment. This means that we have quite a lot of things to do for the future, because this is not very encouraging, especially for the young people which are embracing academic careers. Again, there are quite a lot of fields of implementation for open science, and you can see here the ranking of importance which the university is in, and you see that still the pressure is on publications. Open access publications are still ranked higher. higher compared to some other things like evaluation, for instance. Citizen science is increasing, but fair data should also be taken into consideration. So there is quite an interesting domain, and I feel that those areas are changing from 1 year to another compared to the result. At the same time, the survey showed that there are some drivers for introducing open science. And as you see, the main drivers are on a way or another from top to bottom. So it's national policies or European level policies which are governing that and which are pushing universities to do that, and not something from the bottom up. But this is probably changing quite a lot due to some very interesting people which are working in the field. At the same time, many people are feeling that there are some barriers in the transition to open science, and one of them is the absence of incentives to promote open science activities. This has to do with what I already mentioned before, the lack of open access ideas in the assessment of the university. When they are assessed, no open access policies are taken into consideration. At the same time, this has to do something with the young people which are going into universities, which also need some incentives to embrace open science policy. So if you are summarizing in a way, there are a couple of ambitions which the European Union put into the policy of open science. And I would briefly mention, first of all, the use of open data. Open data is a data which can be freely distributed, reused, and shared by some others. So in some specific conditions of mentioning the one which produced the data at the beginning, but at the same time has quite a lot to do with the governmental data, because data which is shared by authorities can be freely accessed if it is machine readable, and can take to different applications which are provided by the software engineers, especially in getting different information which are very transparent and so on. Of course, there is a need of new metrics because, as I said, assessment is not very much taken into consideration the ideas of openness. Then there is that open science cloud at the European level, which needs to hold all the results of research and of the knowledge which is produced through public funding. And this is something which I already shared. There is a document on European Open Science Cloud, which is in use. Then the communication also need to change at level of scholars. We need rewards for that. We need to put more emphasis on citizen science so that we can communicate and make our research results more accessible to the large public, both in terms of open access, but also in terms of the terminology that we are using, so we can make it accessible for everybody, not only for the higher specialists in the field of research. And of course, that means that also the researchers need some skills in using that, and skills should be provided by training, which is provided by universities or some other source of support. So just very briefly, the idea of the European Science Cloud, which has some more activities in it. I would now go very briefly into presenting some of the experiences which we have in that, especially from our European University Alliance, which we are partners, which is called UDRES, Engage an Entrepreneurial European University as driver for European smart and sustainable regions. As you see, it's an alliance which is formed by universities from 9 countries. At the beginning, we were 6, but we enlarged the partnership to 9 countries. And we are discussing about the strategy at least up to 2027 and even more. The countries which are involved are Austria, Belgium, Hungary, Romania, Latvia, Portugal, Germany, Netherlands, and Finland. The last 3 are the new adding partners to the initial partnership. And the idea is to make innovations in cooperation, because we are all involved, especially in technical fields. And we all know also that STEM subjects are not very popular between the students in the European Union, especially because they are not very accessible, and they need a lot of effort in order to finish study. This is why we took into consideration to have discussions with all our stakeholders between countries, and to have a sort of map of the future university to see which are our goals, what we would like to have. And we see that in many ways, digitalization, digital transformation, and also collaboration should be a very important thing. Of course, everything based on practice, because we as technical university are much more approaching the applied researches and the fundamental research. According to that, we established a vision of the alliance, which has the idea of supporting the regions from where our universities are coming, to support the development of sustainable regions and so on. And regarding open science, I would say, and I gave you an example of the report, which has been done in middle of 2021. Now it is updated because we also have 3 new partners, and some other things already changed in those, let's say, almost 2 years since we established our first strategy. So this is a thing which we are working on. We also think that there are a number of topics which needs to be discussed in our alliances, but also at the European level. And this has to do with the reform of academic careers. As far as you probably know, many times the academic careers are in fact evaluated only based on the results of the research, which means that the part of education is becoming less and less important for many people, which are just trying to shoot exactly what they need in order to advance in their career. And the idea of being a real mentor to the students is receiving less and less importance. So this is something which has to be taken into consideration. We also need to promote interdisciplinarity. We strongly believe that probably in the future, the idea of the areas of studies which are quite traditional will disappear, and we are going to have maybe some areas which are more or less based on the UNESCO goals of development, and which will need the interdisciplinarity from one subject to another compared to the traditional education we have now. The education should be digitized, should be transformed digitally, because we all face the problem of the students that they don't have many times the time to come into school all the time, because most of them are also working part-time or even full-time. And we need also to provide some support for them when they need it and from where they need it, and so on. So I'm not going to take too much time, but you probably read the ideas, and if there are some questions, we can take them at the end. Connected to this project of European University Alliance, we also started a number of other projects, and some of them are having main topics in open science too. And this example is from a project which is called Renovators, where we try to put together the let's say professor as entrepreneur, as tutor, as mentor, and as innovator, and to have in center the students which can do that. And all of those can be done better through open science, open innovation, and open education. There were some meetings for doing that. And of course, that we started with an analysis to what we have in common in our 9 universities, what we still need to do together, what we need to develop, and so on. And the results of a study which has been just released now, it's the first time where when I'm presenting some of those results, is that not too many people in our universities are very aware of the way they can use open access, open innovation, and so on. You see the figures are varying, but the higher is around 50%, which is not very high. And we speak about technical universities mainly. On another hand, if we speak about open publications, you see that the results are far better, because it seems that all the universities are driven, first of all, by the idea of assessment, which is the assessment based on publication, and they took and embraced open access in terms of publications, especially to increase their values. If we speak about tools which they are working, again, the results are very different from one university or another, but the figures are not very impressive. So there is quite a lot of things to be done in the future. Another project which has to do with that is a project which is developed also in the partnership of the 6 universities which started UDRES too. And in that we established some open innovation hubs for ensuring somehow the participation of all universities, of the students, of the professors, and so on. You have the roadmap here. It is quite easy to be followed if you have the time to read everything. Otherwise, it's not that easy to be explained in a short while. But we'll share the presentation, and we shall be accessible for questions even after this webinar. I'm sure about that. Anyway, the practical result is that we are going to establish 6 open innovation hubs in our partnership, and the one which we just launched is the beginning is that one which is let's say supported mainly by our university and the Polytechnic Institute in Setúbal in Portugal, which has to do with digital technologies and advanced manufacturing. So I think I will stop here, and I will take questions if there are, and probably will be able to answer even later to some other questions which can arise. I will stop sharing in order to be easier to see about questions and answers.
Thanks very much, Radu.
You're welcome.
I'll just have a quick.
Maybe you read already if there are some questions in that.
I think there is, yeah. Well, mainly about your slides. You've got some very good diagrams in there. The one I really liked, the one the Creative Commons would. This one is more of a comment than a question, I think. about ethics, and so it's from Jonathan. When I started, I wonder if open science will have a long growth period stage like ethics did.
Well, I think Dermot also mentioned something quite near that idea of ethics, because as long as you are making openly accessible not only the results of your research, but also the data which you used in order to make the research, and you make also accessible the methodology that you have used, everybody can replicate your research. And this is, of course, immediately able to be considered as a valid one or not. So you have nothing to hide. That's important in transparency and ethics.
That's Radu. There's another one which is more of a sharing of a similar project. So if anyone else wants to share a project, or if they're part of an open research or open science group, please go ahead. And we can connect up a bit more. Maybe there'll be another EU project out of it. Radu seems to have a good few there, don't you? I have a question for you, Radu. Why is open science more successful than OER or OEP?
Well, I think open science is successful mainly because it gives to the management of the universities a direct feeling of increasing their potential, of increasing the number of publications, the way they are assessed, and so on. While open education sometimes is a little bit difficult because it has to do with the individual. And honestly speaking, many of our professors, don't take me wrong if I'm saying that, are not still having the idea exactly if all the material which they are using in their courses is original or something is taken from different sources without even having the idea from where in order to cite it correctly. So this is why at least we realize that a few people are interested, let's say, in putting their courses in a MOOC. We have a MOOC platform of the university. We offered it for free to all universities in Romania, but there was not too much interest in sharing their courses there. And I feel that mainly the idea is not that they have the intention to plagiate or something like that, but sometimes, especially for older professors, they still don't know exactly from where they took all the information. They are afraid about not being able to cite correctly, and they will be immediately available to everybody. They will be judged, and there will always be somebody accusing them of plagiarism. So
that's a solid answer, Reggie. No, it's a thing I've been wondering about, because I'm involved in a big project around OER, and I've been watching open science kind of as nearly a parallel intersecting movement. And I just think, God, open science seems to be great at getting money and awareness and policy. And there's energy and movement in the space that I think is lagging a bit in the OEP or OER space. So I'm curious about how we can transfer some of those ideas across. So thanks very much for your presentation, Radu. It was very interesting.
thank you.
Our final speaker, Niamh Brennan, is with us. Hi, Niamh. How are you? Welcome. So I'm just going to read your bio a bit, Niamh, if that's okay, and then I'll hand over to you. So Niamh is Program Manager of the TCD Research Informatics in Trinity College Dublin, where she works on research reporting, evaluation, impact, research skills training, and open scholarship via Trinity's CRIS and its integrated institutional repository, TARA. And actually, it's actually great alignment between the speakers, because Dermot was speaking a bit on this theme, but Radu was also speaking about it from the policy perspective on how this kind of training is needed. And here you are, Niamh, about to talk about that said training. And I'm familiar with TARA. My PhD thesis is on there, so a very nice repository. Niamh is also coordinator of Trinity's mandatory online module for online research postgrads, research integrity and impact in the open scholarship era. So again, that came up in discussions earlier. So it's a very good panel, if I say so myself. So over to you, Niamh. I'm going to skip the second paragraph if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I hope I can live up to your expectations, Orna. So I'll just go into my PowerPoint then, and I don't see any sharing. Will I automatically share?
Have to do share screen. There's a share screen button there. It should be for you.
That's what I'd expect.
Showing up in green. And maybe if you could turn your volume up a tiny bit as well.
Okay, I'll try and do that. And sorry, I'm just looking for that share button. So I beg your pardon about this because it's not in this usual place. So, oh yeah, I see it, sorry.
See it?
Yeah, got it. Okay. So I'm just going to go in here. So because Radu has gone through quite a lot of information on the policies and so on, I've hid it because it's something that is very relevant to the area that I'm going to talk to you about. And I'm focusing very much on open access. And I hope that by the time I finish, you'll see that things aren't quite as plain sailing in open access as they might appear from the outside. And actually, I believe that open education resources have an advantage. Well, we can discuss that later if you want. I've called this open access and control of our knowledge, quando a como. So first of all, I'm going to ask, where are we? And we're definitely not in Kansas anymore. This is not where we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but we still haven't got to where we want to go to. Open science, you've probably seen the 8 pillars of open science from the European Commission, and that covers a multitude, including research integrity. I really like the Foster Open Science Beehive, which includes citizen science, obviously, as well, but has open education resources in there as well, linked in together inextricably from the other base of knowledge that we create. So I'm looking at open access. Obviously, we've been talking about the Council of Europe, with the big news today, and came out yesterday, was the Council calling for transparent, equitable, and open access. And that word equitable is really important, right? So this is something that I would like to focus on to make sure that we don't think that everything is okay, because it's not. And so we also have the G8, Science and Technology Ministry, made their statement on earlier on in May, and they actually say that they have a growing concern that some actors may attempt to unfairly exploit or distort the open research environment and misappropriate research results for economic, strategic, geopolitical, or military means, right? So this is the whole ethical area coming in straight away. We were familiar with the policies, and we've spoken about them already. Plan S from Coalition S in Europe, America from the Latin America and the Global South, and the principles for open access of scholarly communication in and about Africa. And I'm deliberately bringing in this because I really want us to look at this in the global sense. I think we have to do that, and if we don't do it, we're going to just go down the wrong road. And we may have been going a little bit down the wrong road of late, but we're back on track. Horizon Europe, for example, says that they want to foster diffusion of knowledge in open science, so that's more policy. And of course, we have the SDGs, where UNESCO says that the open access has a fundamental role to support the SDGs, and it's committed to making open access one of the central supporting agendas. We'll come back to that a little bit later on. This guy might look familiar to you. This is Robert Jan Smits. So he came out in September 2018 to say the transition is far too slow. There was a mere 5% increase in open access publications in 15 years. The funders, research funders, got really tired of this. They've have mandates, and we have institutional mandates for at least the last 10 years. So, and this is something that we can see as an intransigent problem. He said, we're not going to get full open access by 2020, which was the plan. It's impossible unless we take radical and robust measures. And that's where the Coalition S came in with Plan S. They said it was a matter of principle. It's a moral issue. It's about the effective use of taxpayers' monies, costs of subscriptions, overall costs, need for faster dissemination, and for the further generation of knowledge and research innovation. I would suggest that those principles apply equally to open education, if not even more so. So in Ireland, here is our policy transition. You can see it's been a long road. We've finally got to the National Open Research Plan in 2022, just last year, after our National Open Research Forum was established back in 2017. Our first principles for national open access were back in 2012. So it's still taking a long route. And you'd probably say, I wonder how they are in terms of open access. Well, depending on how you're counting it, we'd say somewhere between 40 and 50% open access to journal articles, right? So that's quite a lot of money and a lot of effort that's gone into something that has taken place quite slowly. So there's our National Open Research Forum, and we got some funding. And again, this is something that is possibly unique to the research area in Ireland, at least, is that we've got 2 tranches of funding to the National Open Research Forum. So our Minister for Higher and Further Education, Minister Harris, first of all announced 1.7 million in funding for our open research transition. And then earlier on this year, we were delighted that he announced a further nearly 2 million funding to support our National Action Plan for Open Research. So that's incredibly helpful. This is our North, and I put the link up there. They've had last year, they funded a number of really significant projects about infrastructure in particular, and about support, including an open access monitor. And we'll be coming back in a minute to look at the open access transition program for Diamond Open Access. But note, as I'm going along, there's a focus on the repositories as well, right? So there's a new focus on green open access, and you'll see why. But it's really important for us to note, as they said in Nature, and they're ones to know, where they say open science done wrong will compound inequities. They've said research reform advocates must beware of unintended consequences. So that's what we need to really look at hard at this stage about where we are, and especially for OER, not to make the same errors. So it's not a question of when, but also of how we do this. Danny Kingsley from Australia, in a recent brilliant slideshow, and I've got the link to it at the end of this, said, let's get our act together. And she pointed out that the flipping plan failed. This idea of paying article processing charges to publishers, often on top of our subscriptions as read and publish agreements, has failed. There has not been a widespread flipping of journals. There has not been a move to this open gold, open access. The vast majority of gold free open access journals still don't charge article processing charges, and the whole environment is being skewed because of some big players who are charging outrageous fees. Many of you would know that Nature itself is charging in excess of $8,000 per journal article to get open access. There's something badly wrong with this system, and you'd wonder, how did we end up here? Just showing you a few more headlines. Open access publishing fees deter researchers in the global south. It's another article from Nature. It said one of the great ironies of open access is you grant authors around the world the ability to finally read the scientific literature, but ends up excluding them from publishing in the same journals. Again, something badly wrong here. So, and London School of Economics Impact Blog did a study on article processing charges and the new enclosure of research. MIT Press, the article processing charge barrier and its effect on stratification in open access publishing, driving authors towards the big publishers and killing bibliodiversity. Right. So I've shown this slide before. It's time to change the world's very unequal knowledge map. We are citizens of the world, and research and education is a global endeavor. The very well known, and I know that you know Laura Chernovich very well, she said that funding and technological infrastructure has to be improved, and research outputs need to be recognized as existing beyond the boundaries of formal journal articles. As Radu mentioned, incentives and reward systems need to be adjusted. The open access movement needs to broaden its focus from access to knowledge to full participation in knowledge creation and in scholarly communication. So taking back control of this will mean the elimination of embargoes on self-archiving authors' accepted manuscripts. We need to get rid of them immediately. We need to do it now. Many institutions have already done it, but the authors don't know. We need to require publishers who receive public funding that they should deposit the metadata and the author's manuscript into the parent's repository, or parent institution's repository, and in all cases apply author copyright retention. So that's absolutely critical. which brings me to rights retention. Already we have Harvard, MIT, the N8 partnership in the UK, and very many other institutions have decided that they are going to apply and exert their institutional right to the copyright. And this is relevant to OER as well as to research. This is something that our National Open Research Forum has just put out a call for a national project in Ireland in relation to this area. Taking back control would mean that institutions and countries would allow researchers to retain their copyright, and it's not easy in reality. That the funders would allow greater choices of licenses to allow greater flexibility, for example, in the arts and humanities, and facilitate the ease with which the licenses can be applied. Don't add any more complexity into the system, keep it simple. Taking back control, we're focusing in Ireland, like many other countries, on diamond open access publishing, immediate open access free of charge to both authors and to readers. That follows the lead by Science Europe and their action plan for open access and for diamond open access, and the wonderful leads that our librarians in particular have taken under the IOAP, the Irish Open Access Publishers Group, who support, it's an umbrella group that supports small independent open access publishers, many of them led by, based in libraries. And you can look at their website there. So they're very committed to diamond open access. The North has funded the Open Access Transition Programme. And a very quick look at that is that we're creating a feasibility study for a national editorial management system and a platform for books and journals that publishers want to publish diamond open access. It's going to develop a pilot platform. Sorry, I've got a lot of background noise going on here. Let's wait for that to stop. So Publish Open Access is creating a feasibility report for a national publishing platform. And we've been in contact with the Netherlands and with the Finnish Learning Society and many others who are doing similar things or have done them in their country. We're creating a digital directory of Irish scholarly publishers, both commercial and non-commercial. We have a tiny commercial publishing industry in Ireland, and they can hardly make ends meet. So bibliodiversity is absolutely key to this. And we're doing a landscape report of the environment to look at what's required to support this transition to diamond open access. We already have a national set of open access publishing principles and standards for publishers. And I'll give you an idea of who's involved in it. So the Royal Irish Academy are leading it. My own institution is involved. We have representatives of readers, publishers, authors, and an international advisory group. It's a very broad ranging group with a very strong emphasis on making sure that arts and humanities are not disenfranchised. That's Publish OA, that's there. So, and DIAMUS is of course the European project that is associated with that. We're very influenced by the Next Generation Library Publishing Project, which applies a holistic approach to value-driven publishing. And if you're not familiar with that project, I really invite you to go to their website and to look at what they're doing in terms of building a stack of open source an open source infrastructure that will support this publishing at scale into the future. Other parts of infrastructure and taking it back are La Referencia, of course, sort of in Latin America and obviously in the Spanish-speaking world. Open Air and EOSC, who are building infrastructure around this area. This is all part of us taking back our control. The open research platforms like the HRB Open Research and the European Open Research Europe. And then looking very quickly around taking back control, again, what Radu and Dermot referenced were the assessment and the recognition for researchers. There's been a massive amount of work going on in this area. Most recently, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, looking at completely different ways of assessing research and bringing open science and open access metrics into that mix. So even including training, recognition of training for open access and for fair data management. Taking back control of our values is something that I want to finish off with, because I think this is really important. Again, Stephen Harnett, who's kind of come back from the past, and many of you remember him, in the 13th of May, he published a paper in the University World News saying publishers can't be blamed for clinging to the golden goose. And it's true. I mean, we wouldn't blame other profit-making organizations, oil companies and other companies, for seeking to make a profit. And that's what they do. You know, it's really down to us. authors, content creators, libraries, we need to ask ourselves, what are our values? When I suggest that we should apply the same standards that we're starting to apply to EDI and to sustainability, to the area of knowledge creation. And that's what the Guild of European Research Intensive Universities were getting at when they said diversity, sustainability, and quality must be hallmarks of academic publishing in Europe. The Budapest Declaration, the 20th anniversary, they were 20 years doing this, right? They boiled it down to 4 principles. And they're saying host open access research on an open infrastructure. I mean, that's fairly obvious, but it's amazing the number of organizations that are actually allowing the usual suspects, the big profit-making organizations, to come right in and build their infrastructures. And the irony, reform research assessment, favor inclusive publishing and distribution plans, get rid of the article processing charges, and remember the goals that we're standing for. International Open Access Week this week is about community over commercialization, and that's really significant at this particular point. I suggest we should start taking back our values by applying these principles to our system, services, and content. The CARE principles for Indigenous data governance, the FAIR principles, and the forest principles. And look at what Laura Chernovich and Catherine Cronin have started to do. They're working on a manifesto for higher education for good. And they're bringing out a book on that, which you maybe, I'll put in a link to it at the end of this as well. When we talk about open education for sustainability, then there are all kinds of things that are going well for open education, but there's a whole lot of things in the other column that aren't. Poor discoverability, it's disconnected, it's fragmented, there's poor interoperability. Shall I go on? There's this focus needs to shift to intelligent ways of increasing interconnectedness. We need to ensure that the best research and educational resources are available and that they're fair, meaning findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and that should apply to open education resources as well. We should work with all the stakeholders and support localization and customization on the ground, anywhere in the world, and together advocate for open, fair research and education resources for all. Education cannot wait. I would agree with you there. And there was an excellent debate led by the Irish UN mission and supported by the UN missions of Ghana, Morocco, and others, which was a debate around transforming education at the Transforming Education Summit in New York at the United Nations. And I was honored to be part of that on digital learning and transformation. They've looked for exactly these changes to be made. So let's get our act together, said Danny Kingsley, and there's a link to her slideshow. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niamh. It was fantastic. And you joined the dots there to back to OEP at the end. Well done. And to Catherine Cronin, who's a big name in Open OEP. So that was fantastic. Thanks so much. Just have a quick look and see, is there any questions for you? Any questions for Niamh? I always think that it's great to get the librarian perspective because the role of librarians in open education and open access and open research is really important. And it's inspired me to go embark on several collaborative projects with librarians as well. And thanks, Dermot, for sharing some of your work there as well. Any questions for Niamh? Otherwise, I'll have to think of a difficult one. What about the whole North infrastructure, Niamh? You briefly touched on it, but it does seem like a significant amount of funding from the Irish government. I mean, what kind of difference do you think that might make?
Well, I think it makes all the difference. And I suppose I have to say that this is something that has come, I'm going to say, I don't want to sound in any way mealy-mouthed about this, but it's been a long time coming, you know, and we still don't have exactly the right infrastructures in Ireland. North is great. Yes, Jonathan, I'll be glad to share my slides. And sorry, I just saw that popping up. So North is wonderful. It's going through a new, sorry, it's just, I've got to turn that off. The North is about to make a transition into a different kind of a structure. But at the moment in Ireland, we don't have a Ministry for Science and Technology. We have no government department that takes on this. And many people in other countries might be surprised at that. You know, I know in Denmark and other countries, they do. So we've got these sort of ministerial directions coming down very strongly. The North reports into our ministry, but it's not part of it yet. But hopefully it will, and that open education and the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning will join up with that, and we'll get real joined up thinking going on in this space. But I think with North, with the funding, first of all, the influence of the European Commission cannot be underestimated in this area. I had a slide which I kind of left out, and that actually, I might put it in when I'm sharing them, which shows the European Commission came out with recommendations that were not recommendations on the 28th of April 2018. They required all of the member states to come up with their national action.
I like that. That's an interesting use of the word recommendation.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
An interesting point about how fragmented the different agencies and funders are in Ireland, and some, that is getting a bit better organized, but that is quite problematic. And even the fact that we have now a department like a Ministry for Education and a Ministry for Higher Education. And where does the Ministry for, that's a great point about that. Where does the Ministry for Science and Technology?
Yeah, when I was in the UN in September, the Minister for Education for Ghana was on the panel, and you should go in and take a look at that. And he spoke about how they were overcoming the difficulties of accessibility in terms of access to the internet and so on quite brilliantly, but also said that they had immediately started by making all of their textbooks free for all of the school children. Now, some countries, the BRICS, have said that they've done the same thing. We're again, it's something that I'm sure that many of the people who are involved here in education and education technology and so on would like to be part of that conversation about, the sort of the entire continuum of education from day one in kindergarten all the way up and through to life skills and continuing education. But we're not always joined in there. And the research and education nexus is still, we're talking about it as if it's taking place on different planets, as if they're the same people who are actually,
they're all intersecting circles. You're hitting on another one of my favorite topics, open textbooks. We could have a whole other webinar on that.
So we're seeing strong movements finally towards, and I think the FAIR movement has been incredibly strong in the research data area. It cannot be underestimated how strong and how clever the acronym of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable is, that covers the licensing and everything like that. I've been campaigning for the last year to try and get, I don't know whether I'm going to be happy about this or not, but to try and get an acceptance of that open education resources should be fair. Being licensed is good, sort of being interoperable is very good, but they need to be findable and accessible as well. So
that's actually one of the challenges the Encore project that I'm working on is looking at, is making, trying to improve how the repositories are indexing and collating, and using AI in some cases to address exactly those challenges. So you're right, there is that gap. We need more librarians in the OER space is the answer.
Exactly, and this is where Professor Patrick Paul Walsh, who's the president of the SDG Academy, started. I gave you a link to the slideshow that he was responsible for that session in the UN, and he's established a wonderful partnership with Creative Commons, with IFLA, and so the International Federation of Library Associations, and with the ESG, people who are responsible for certifying environmental and sustainability, and with a number of other kind of really interesting players internationally, and it's all about trying to really accelerate fair, open educational resources for sustainable development. The librarians are right in there in the heart.
Oh, I'm sure they are. There's a great organization we've been collaborating with, Spark Europe as well, who are fantastic in that space. So there's lots of praise and things coming through in the chat, and not many questions though. But I have one final question for all three of you before we finish. I've been thinking a bit about, I've been thinking a lot about AI recently. And there was a tweet by Maha Bali, who's an open scholar, about how she worries about open educational resources being hoovered up without any acknowledgement for copyright or intellectual property by the databases of large language models. And I'm kind of wondering, is that actually quite a threat to the open movement generally? So I'll put that first to Dermot, maybe.
Yeah, just give me the easy ones. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think it is a threat. You know, people are putting a huge amount of work into preparing materials or documentation or whatever, and you know, it's nice that people work should be acknowledged appropriately when it's being reused. And it's not just, you know, educational resources. You know, I mean, the publishing industry at large is extremely worried. There's stuff being sucked up by ChatGPT that's you know, ostensibly behind paywalls or whatever, that's just being part of the models as well and not being acknowledged, and then is going to be reused in newly generated content with no attribution at all. And of course, with the models, because they're just probability machines, there's no way of ascertaining, are these actually accurate reflections of the original content, or have they been manipulated to be untrue, you know, like you see with ChatGPT creating citations or references that look plausible, but that simply don't exist in reality. So attributing stuff incorrectly or not at all is going to be a problem as well. And of course, that doesn't get into the issue of, you know, how do you assess students in an age of these large language models as well.
Oh, I'm deep into that at the moment, Dermot. Naomi Klein had a really great article, I think it was in The Guardian, exactly about the errors, but people using weird language not describing them as errors or inaccuracies or wrong, but calling them things like hallucinations, as if that's, you know, not wrong. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. Maybe same question to yourself, Radu. What do you think about what's going to happen in this space between AI and open?
About that, and I should say that many of the people are considering this as a big threat for open access movement. But on the other hand, it is something which could happen anyway, with or without the artificial intelligence tools. The problem is that the one which are using them should also take into consideration the ethics. Because as you see, there is a change of policy also for big journals. IEEE, for instance, already published a policy about citing any text which is generated with AI as a citation and to be interpreted and so on. We are also we'll have a meeting of the Senate tomorrow, and we are going to discuss even that for our students as recommendations again, as the European Commission probably, but they will come probably into a methodology and there's a requirement because we need to know if they at least learn something from using those AI tools, because otherwise there is no need of using them just in order to fill some text and to provide the information in an essay or in a final diploma thesis and so on. On the other hand, sometimes the results coming from ChatGPT are very, let's say, different from the reality. Recently, we had an event in the university which was called Tech Talks, and we had as invited the founder of Wikipedia. And I don't want to give names and so on, but his wife is also quite a public person, which used to work as an advisor for Tony Blair and so on. So she was also found in different information. And she tried to see what ChatGPT tells about that. And he simply asked, who is married, the name of his wife, and so on. He received the 4 different answers, but any of them was correct because they all kept their names, each one of them. So it was not so obvious that they were married. So sometimes those tools are made in order to answer to anything, even without having the proper information and the correct one, without checking anything. And probably what Dermot already said, inventing some references, it's probably the easier thing to find somehow that some text has been generated with those tools. But we
Yes.
cannot do anything. We cannot stop him. I don't agree with those which are saying that we need to put more reglementation or to stop the development. If we are stopping, someone will do it, and it's going to do underground for bad purposes, even worse probably that we are expecting at this moment. So we need to adapt, and we need to take some countermeasure, and especially to increase the level of exigence and of the ethics which our student staff are having.
Yeah, lots of thoughts on that, Radu. It was obviously a good
Yeah.
question. And what about yourself, Niamh? I mean, information verification is always a hot topic with librarians. So I'm sure. What do you think?
Absolutely, and we're going to stick with the standards, so that one of the issues that I have with this is, first of all, I think that Radu mentioned this already, was that this is something that was happening anyway, right? And we were sitting back ignoring it, right? We did not get our act together. So it's about bloody time that we did. And AI had to come along to make us all sit up and pay attention. Already we had people telling us from, I think it was, again, Laura Chernovich, who talked about the concern of African universities who are making OER available only to see them grabbed by commercial entities who started to put paywalls on them and so on. This is already happening. So what were we doing? Where's our licensing? Where's our branding? Where's our control, our tracking of what's going on? We haven't been looking after ourselves, our knowledge, and our resources. You'd wonder what we've been doing. I know what we've been doing. We're chasing our tails, trying to do everything else, trying to teach and everything else. But somewhere we have to make time for this. We see what went on, what has happened in the social media sphere, right? And we went through a global pandemic where misinformation and disinformation was causing public health problems for us, serious ones, right? And that is set to continue. This is in the same area. We need to be sure, again, what are our values or principles? What are we prepared to countenance, and what are we not? If there's misuse of information, if there's incitement to hatred, then we're clearly on the right side of the human rights side of things in looking for some level of regulation. Radu's right. We can turn AI against itself. We can counteract this in many ways. But we do need to start working together on this absolutely immediately, if not yesterday.
Thank you, Niamh. Yeah, we need to develop critical AI literacy is what I'm talking about at the moment. So sorry to turn the last 15 minutes into an AI session, but sure, you know yourself, that's HE at the moment. So we have a minute or two if anyone wants to pop anything in the chat. And while I'm giving you the chance to do that, let me just say thank you very much to the three speakers, Dermot, Radu and Niamh. It was really great session, and the topics intersected even better than I hoped. So thanks very much. And all the slides and the webinar recording, etc., will be available on the Eden website afterwards. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming along. Lots of thank yous in the chat there as well. And talk to you soon.